Yep.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to our March 27th, 2024 Zoning Bylaw Review Working Group meeting. As you can see up on the screen, our agenda includes one item, and we will likely be talking about this one item for a little bit. And I'll explain in a minute why. But first, I just wanted to cover some logistical items. So I believe that there may be folks from the public who are attending today, although I can't see them in the room. But in the event that someone is in attendance from the public, the way we will handle public comment during the discussion is through the chat feature. So if there are questions that someone has of the group or a comment that they want to provide, simply just type it into the chat feature. And additionally, at the end of our discussion, we will allow for members of the public to essentially raise their hand, be promoted as a panelist, and then enter into this group that we see here and be able to just speak their question to us or provide comments at that time. So that's how we will allow public participation during this meeting and future meetings. So with that, we are recording this session. We'll be posting it to FCTV afterward. We also have them post it to the FCTV YouTube channel, and we will also post it to our webpage. And all the materials that come along with it, we will also be posting. So with that, any questions from the group? Seeing none, I will jump right into the first and only agenda item. So the mixed residential and commercial overlay district has been a topic of conversation with this group in the past. As you all know, we were thinking about bringing it forward at the April town meeting, the one that's upcoming, but we decided to pull it back and take a more thorough review of the bylaw itself because of questions related to a variety of different elements within the bylaw itself. And those included, for example, the definitions and the definition specifically of the mixed-use development and the potential of changing that definition or modifying it a little. There was also a discussion about should we continue to allow it to be a by right process, which is the current situation, through special permit, or should we consider changing it over to a special permit process, both with the planning board, and reasons for those. And then there were two other items, the first being dimensional requirements. There has been some comments that we've received from the development community related to the issues of building height and setbacks. So right now, our current building height is capped at 35 feet, and our setback is a maximum of 20 feet from the street. And then the last item is the affordability component. So we have language in there that if an applicant succeeds with a Mr. Cod application, that 25% of the units have to be affordable, and they would be local action units through the state process. And so those are we'll call them categories that we would like to discuss with the group. Ideally, what we would like to do is just take one at a time and sort of discuss pros and cons of, or at least some history of that particular item, and then we can move on. So unless anyone has any objection to that process, I'm going to propose that we start off with, I think, the most important one, which is, should we keep this Mr. Cod bylaw as a site plan review controlled situation, or should we consider changing it over to special permit? And I'm going to just give a brief history of why we're thinking of that and in the group. The reason being is, as you know, the group was expressing concerns about the future, especially looking, decades down the road, is there an ability for the town to eventually say no to a project if perhaps we get a developer or a private firm that wants to do things that the town necessarily isn't interested in, or perhaps there's too much development that happens and we want to have more control over the process. And so that's the question related to with site plan review. Clearly, that's just a review of a site plan. And via a special permit that would have more authority, if you will. So, and the last item is, of course, I asked Bob Mitchell to take a look at this bylaw for us and sort of provide a synopsis of his thoughts. And hopefully everyone got a chance to see that document in email. We can likely refer to it throughout the discussion here today. But, you know, at some point we'll be sharing it on the screen so that folks at home can see what that response looks like. So with that, I think perhaps I'll just open it up to anyone who has comments about site plan versus special permit, and then we can, you know, toss that around for a bit.
Could I frame it as a question? Could Bob or you or Frank tell us what are the pros and cons of changing to the special permit? What do we gain? What do we lose? Frank?
Well, I think one of the things is the special permit you can impose conditions which can be enforced by the building commissioner when they issue building permits and issue certificates of occupancy and so on and so forth. And I understand from the comments that I saw from Bob Mitchell that under the site plan review, it's more difficult to deal with a contractor who kind of ignores the conditions in a site plan review. I also have a concern. If you look at Mr. Cod and where it's going to be in town, I think Mr. Cod is always going to be applied in a reconstruction or a redevelopment of an existing property. There's really not going to be much use of this, maybe none right now, out, you know, free of neighbors. Every project that comes along under Mr. Cod is going to have a lot of neighbors. And I think it's very important that they be able to be heard and the special permit granting authority be able to consider the concerns of neighbors. I think it's very important that there be just one stop, one special permit, that you don't have to go all over the place, so it'll be treated like a comprehensive permit. But I think that probably a special permit by the planning board is a more appropriate way to handle it, considering that all these Mr. Cod projects are going to be developed or redeveloped in the middle of town.
Bob?
Thanks. I just want to follow up on one comment Frank just made, which took me by surprise. I did not intend, and I didn't understand, I didn't think I had any language in my that said that site plan review conditions are not enforceable. If you have a regular site plan review process, like most towns have, but you don't have, the conditions of a site plan review are equally enforceable just as the special permit conditions are by the building commissioner.
Well, I'll stand corrected if I made a mistake on that.
So I just,
okay.
So just to
okay.
clarify.
Thank you, Bob.
Bob, could you go further with that? You just said we don't have a regular site plan review, and yet it says build as approved or else. So what is missing from our site plan review that diminishes its authority?
Well, you don't have the language in there about on what conditions site plan review can be conditioned and what conditions the site plan review could be denied. And the process probably needs a more elaboration too. You have a very narrowly focused site plan review process compared to towns that have an independent standalone by right site plan review process. So there's a variety of issues, you know, what's the appeal of a site plan review process, and so there's a whole variety of things that came up back when we started this, on the original list of things that needed attention. One of that was the list of things that were missing from your site plan review process.
Thank you.
Yeah, Pat.
Sure.
Sorry.
Well, it seems from where we are right now that we're trying to put emphasis on this. We'd have two things to bring it under control. I think to more easily bring it under control for right now, we'd be better off doing it under site plan review, because we do not and have not had any kind of a site plan review with teeth in, and Bob was pointing out the very good reasons that there are no teeth in it. But that would mean a big overhaul, which we need to do, of site plan review.
Yes,
Yes,
Noreen.
Noreen.
Hi, so I'm just thinking, you have two possibilities here. One would be that the site plan review process gets updated, which I think you had somewhere on your list. And the second option is to have the planning board issue a special permit. And now you're sort of going to be achieving the same things. However, it might be a quicker route to have the planning board just be the permit granting authority, but to do it as a special permit so that you are able, through that process, to issue conditions, et cetera, that the developer must comply with, as opposed to leaving it as site plan approval, but that you don't have your site plan approval path squared away. So I guess if we are voting or suggesting where we're at with this, I would recommend that it be a special permit granted by the planning board so that the neighbors feel like they are able to participate in the process, and that also their appellate rights are not diminished through the process.
Jed, are you chairing? We ought to get this cleared up. Who's doing what? I think you are.
Yeah, so it's really not a chairmanship. It's just, I'm just sort of being the MC.
Mm,
Well,
Yeah, so I would just, I'd agree with Noreen. I think a special permit process through the planning board is really the easier way to go. It's easier to come up with the terms of what it is, and then that it's a quicker fix so that the planning board could enforce conditions or items that they have, versus getting a confusion with again, a site plan review process.
yeah, well, I think, if there's another element to it too, is I think down the road, with a special permit process, you're able to deny a project that perhaps doesn't fit or doesn't have a willing participant on the other side. And so you're able to have a little bit more control, unless I'm misspeaking. You have a little bit more control over the application itself. Bob, go ahead.
This may or may not be applicable. Down the road, there might be a third option, which is depending on how your this section is structured and what uses and what types of uses, it could be a mix and match. It doesn't necessarily have to be everything is a special permit or everything is a site plan review. You could mix and match. Certain uses are special permits and certain uses are site plan review. But as you think about this down the road and as you tweak it more.
Now, Bob, just to clarify, now, if we were going to go in that route, in theory, we would have some sort of use table baked into the bylaw itself, which itemizes what's a special permit, what's a by right use.
Well, if you had enough uses that deserved a use table, yes. But if you only had a few, like 3 or 4 uses or whatever, you don't really need a table for, just a few.
That's fair. That's fair.
How would you distinguish between what needed a special permit and what didn't?
Well, that's the decision of the town to identify what needs a special permit and what needs a site plan review. That's just like your bylaw today. In your use table, some uses are special permit, some aren't. No different.
I should frame that differently. What do you think would call for a special permit rather than by right?
Well, based on the conversation, that I've heard so far, it's right now, one, special permit would be a quicker process to adopt, but number two, it gives you a little more teeth because the special permit process is discretionary. So the board has wider.
Oh, I see that. I meant, you're saying it could be a mix and match of situations depending on the application. What in an
No, not on the application, on identifying which uses in this district would be special permit uses and which uses would be site plan review uses. Again, just like your table of uses, has today.
Yeah, and it seems like that would be an extended conversation to try and figure that out.
Right.
But I guess one would assume that anything that's currently listed in the underlying zoning district as a special permit might also be listed in the overlay district as a special permit. And the same would apply for potentially the by right uses. But yes, it sort of gets a little complicated.
Yeah.
Pat,
I
Pat,
think,
yeah.
yeah, I think cleaner and less confusing is to just keep it as special permit right now.
That's why I mentioned down the road.
Yeah, for
That's
sure.
that's
I heard
not
that, Bob.
today, but I just wanted to, sort of clarify, you're not legally required to do only one or the other. You can mix and match.
Okay. Any other comments on that particular topic? Yeah, I see Noreen. Maybe that's Noreen's hand. I can't tell.
It is, sorry. The only other question I think I had was if there, so where Mr. Cod is an overlay, you still have the underlying zoning. So are you going to sort of adapt the language so that you don't have a circumstance where someone needs approval from zoning and planning, and that if somebody's going to apply under Mr. Cod, that becomes the zone for the parcel?
Yes, and I think I understand what you mean. Essentially, it would be that the planning board would then take control or assume control over the special permit granting authority, or would be that. So any underlying use would then be under the jurisdiction of the planning board if it was chosen as a use that would be combined in, say, a mixed use development.
Right, because you could potentially have a parcel where there could be essentially an existing special permit in place. And so I guess you may still have some overlap, but I guess if you're essentially intending that for the parcel in question, that the planning board will be the permit granting authority, then that should be explicit as well.
Yeah. Bob, I see your hand.
Well, I think that's a great question and a great discussion because the way your language is written now, this is in 247.5B, it says, Mr. Cod is an overlay district superimposed in the B1, B2, the BR districts. Then it says the underlying zoning shall remain in effect, and associated regulations for use, dimensions, and all other provisions of the zoning bylaw and governing those districts shall remain in full force. That concerns me because that's contrary to saying if you got a project going through the Mr. Cod district, the planning board takes over and it kind of overrides the underlying district. That's not what it says. So I just,
Right.
I hadn't picked up on that before, but that language definitely needs to be modified.
Yep, absolutely.
But it can be, I think, relatively easy. Just put a comma there, except when superseded by the choice for Mr. Cod.
Yeah, I think the point remains is that, you know, we would have to edit that language
Yep.
just to make sure. I'm sure we can wordsmith something for the group. So just, you know, sort of stepping back here, and I should have mentioned it at the beginning. You know, obviously the intent here is to discuss these issues today, and sort of get a sense from the working group where we should ask for help, or perhaps where should planning staff take on this role of potentially bringing changes to the Mr. Cod bylaw, and then we would bring them back to the group and discuss them just like we've done in the past with other amendments that we're proposing. So today is more, call it an interview or a discussion to try and get the temperature of the water, if you will.
Okay.
I saw Bob Dugan unmute, and then Noreen, I saw your hand.
Just a question. So I guess what I was thinking is that if it was an applicant being applied under Mr. Cod with those criteria, that anything there could be a special permit by the planning board, which would give them, I think, the kind of regulation criteria they would need. Anything that was previously non-conforming that doesn't have to do with that overlay district, I think you would have a problem switching that over if they didn't, let's say someone decided not to go under the Mr. Cod. Well, then they may be applying for the special permit for the zoning board. But if they were going under Mr. Cod, those criteria would just be under planning. The confusion is coming in is that it seems that we've got situations with these overlay districts, it has to be very clear which options are you allowed to take on your project, whatever you decide your project is. Are you looking to, is Mr. Cod the one that is, you know, more reasonable for you, gives you more opportunity to do what you want? Or is the underlying zoning a better situation for what your project is? The ideas on developers nowadays seem to be that when you have overlay districts, they're adding everything up. How many districts are you in? So what we can do is we'll take the maximum opportunity under one district, then we'll take the maximum opportunity under the next one and the third. And those kind of cancel each other out when you have all these, you know, checks and balances on each one of the overlay districts. So I think there needs to be some kind of a definition that when you are applying under something like this, I mean, Mr. Cod does allow you, you know, a lot of options that the other districts don't. So that may be very, you know, a good choice for somebody. But in those cases, that's what they should be applying under, that overlay district. They shouldn't be adding up because you're going to get these situations happening all over town. And I think it complicates it also for the planning board, because when you're looking at your future planning for the town and how you're looking at growth and what you want to control and what you want to expand, you may not want someone to take all different options on the same parcel. You want them to go under one specific process. So I think that at some point that's going to have to be decided on how you handle those. Again, on the special permit, I just think the plus on the special permit is it gives the planning board more control. And it also gives an option for abutters if there's another process or not. You do not get that under site plan review right now. So just something to think about on you know, when you're going forward.
Anybody else? Oh, nice. Yep, right, Noreen. Sorry.
I am not sure exactly what I was going to say before because it disappeared while I was listening to Bob. That being said, there is also the, I guess, general thought process that in crafting the Mr. Cod overlay or whatever changes you're looking to go forward with, and I guess I do think I was going to ask you about the existing warrant, but separate from that, you know, the planning board should also consider as, you know, potentially special permit granting authority or site plan approval, whichever it is, that if you have explicit language that limits somebody to 20 units per acre, and someone wants to come in with 22 units per acre, that change exceeds the allowance of the bylaw, which would require the person to request a variance. So I just wanted to just generally bring that up.
Yeah, and that's actually another topic that we want to get to, the whole idea of fractional density, but let's stay with the four main ones. And if we've got time at the end, we can circle back to the density question. But it seems like we've come to some sort of consensus. What I'm hearing from the group here is that perhaps a special permit process would be preferable from the planning board. And obviously we would need to think about reworking the language to make it very, very clear how an applicant makes its way through his or her way through the process, be it in the underlying zoning district or in the overlay. So I'm going to transition over to the second topic, and that being the setbacks or the dimensional requirements. Again, what we've heard from the development community is that the building height may be too low, and that there should be exploring. The planning board might want to explore allowing a taller building height, and that the setback requirement may be too restrictive, and so there may need to be some flexibility included in that as well. So again, I just want to reiterate, because I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, if anyone here is from the public and is interested in asking a question or providing input, simply just type it into the chat window and we'll keep an eye on it. But so I wanted to open that topic up. So it's building height and maximum setback, front yard setback. I should be very clear there. Any thoughts on that topic?
So Jen, could you just give us a little more background on what you just said? So can you give some examples of situations why they think the height's restrictive or why they think the setbacks are restrictive?
Yeah, so we have an example over at the Falmouth Plaza where Kimco is trying to work with the existing bylaw, and they are doing their best to fit within the front yard setback. Now, it's a little complicated over there because of the future transportation improvement project, which is going to include a roundabout at Falmouth Heights Road. So they have to incorporate, that improvement, but then also be close to the street. And they have indicated to us that 35 feet just isn't enough for them to create a housing project that would pencil for them. And they'll be disappointing. They have suggested to us, in fact, they were looking to have us bring forward some language that would adjust the building height in certain situations. So for example, if a parcel is over a certain acreage, and I think at the time they were suggesting over 5 acres, they could go up to a building height of something taller than 35 feet. We have internally talked about the potential of doing a sort of a tiered system. So, acreage of under, say, 2 acres, we cap it at 35 feet. Above 2 acres, but not exceeding 5, maybe we increase it to some other number. And then parcels over 5 acres, which there aren't many in the Mr. Cod district, I think perhaps 4 or 5, those could go up to an even higher building height. And again, it's related to, in what we're hearing is the affordability requirement. So 25% of the units would need to be affordable. So that sort of is creating a project that may not be able to be built because of, current building costs and whatnot. So there's some interest.
So I guess I'll just make a couple comments on it and then people can go on. From what I'm hearing in town in general, just this is from a public aspect on the projects that are currently being built. You are having a big pushback right now on the Scranton Ave building that's going up for the senior housing because suddenly people think that that is way too high. That's a large parcel over your 2 acres. So that's, if you're looking at this in a situation where you're looking at acreage versus building, there's a difference if most of that acreage is undeveloped and then you're developing one structure. So I think you have to look at what is being developed on these larger parcels if you're going to be thinking about a height increase. You've got a couple other projects. So next to me right now on Main Street, you've got the Liberty Green project going up. Building's not up yet, but when that building goes up, it's going to be much taller than the Scranton Ave property. You've got the 704 that's been there for years, and I don't know what their height is, honestly. People seem to be okay with that project, but you're getting a bunch of these projects in a general area. Once you get these large heights, once they're constructed, you then get a better idea of what kind of a effect they're going to have on a general community. In my case here, because of the height that's going to be next door, I am now becoming limited on anything I want to do regarding solar. I'm going to be in a shade zone. On the Scranton Ave building, if you're driving into town in the morning, you'll notice that the areas that used to be sunny now get the shade from that area. That is all going to be exacerbated as these larger developments start coming in. So I think that you have to be very careful in the situations where you're raising the heights of these structures. If a developer or somebody comes in and says, we can't make it work under what we have, they're going to have to be very specific on why and what their other options were they looked at. If you had brought up, the Kimco and situations with the Rotary, well, if their reasons have to do with something with the street change, they then could apply for a variance issue there. You've now got a change on lot shape and how it affects it in an area. That's an individual project. But I will tell you, once Liberty Green is up, you're going to get a lot of comments in town just because of the sheer size. You've got another parcel on Main Street that was just purchased, which is a very large building now and a large parcel. You may get development there. I worry a bit when changes come in some of these overlays, or when you're thinking of dimensional changes or height changes, when they're for a specific developer or a one specific site versus throughout the district. I think when you do an overlay district, if you're going to do that, then you have to look at, if we increase the height in the overlay district, we have to figure what a total build out would be if everyone in that district decided to go to max height. That's what has the biggest effects on the town throughout. When it comes to the affordability requirement, I understand they're saying it might be difficult, but I've heard the same arguments on another project that's in town right now on why a building has to be 4 stories, because if it's not 4 stories, it's not economical. And nothing has been shown that that is the only style that goes throughout the town. The other concern I have on the overlay district on Mr. Cod is a lot of the public still remembers when it wasn't Mr. Cod and we were looking at smart planning and we were having the meetings showing what these projects would look like. And that went over a series of years. The town put a lot of money in, great architecture firms, and they did examples of what the architectural styles would be. This town does not have an architectural review. There is nothing for stopping a building to do a square box. You can have some conditions or suggestions in site plan review. It still is not going to stop them from doing something like that. And that was one of the issues when they were looking at Mr. Cod originally. when the previous town planner was here, the planning board had a great list of all the things they wanted this district to look like if it was built out, what they thought the buildings would look like, the setup would look like. But when the district went through, those were just set aside as a guideline. They're not a mandate. They're not a requirement. Somebody can look at it, but you can't change it. And when we're looking at these very large parcels, even though they're in a downtown district, they have one of the largest effects in the town because this is what everybody sees. This is where everybody comes downtown. This is where the commercial areas are. And if you start changing the looks of those, it's just going to start expanding. So I would just hope going forward that you actually have very strict restrictions on what you want this to look like. And if a developer says they can't meet something, they have to back it up with some kind of information. They can't just say, I need to go 20 feet because there is no way I could ever do this unless I go an extra 20 feet, just as an example. But once these other projects starts getting built in town, you're going to start getting a big pushback. And I think then you're going to start people wanting to do all sorts of changes with the overlay district. The comments on the overlay district that have to do, one of the goals is to traffic congestion mitigation. Well, that makes sense when you're doing residential units, but it doesn't make sense when you're doing a complete build out. Only because Falmouth doesn't have large streets. And that's why you're hitting now with the rotary issue. So you've got other issues that are just gonna start adding up as these other projects get built. You just need to look at the district as a whole, and you really need to look out what your maximum build out could be. And if your maximum build out is something that you don't like or doesn't fit on what you think your vision should be, then those are the restrictions you need to start putting in there so that maybe you could do a variance if somebody has to go over, or maybe you could have an exception here and there. But you got to look at the big picture. You can't look at these. It's almost like spot zoning nowadays. It's what people never planned for years ago. It's just not what they wanted. So when you are looking at dimensional changes and stuff, please look at it as throughout the whole district. And if everybody decided they were going to take the maximum allowed setbacks and height and how that would vision throughout the area.
Yeah, and I think I should just be clear, because it may have been not clear when I started. By no means am I suggesting that we do this. This is just an open conversation about what we're hearing. And so this is just stuff that we're hearing. And if the working group is saying, no, we'd rather keep it at 35, then we don't move forward with anything to the planning board. But that's the point of the discussion for the group. So Noreen, I saw your hand first. And then I saw Charlotte.
I promise to be quick. So 2 things. First, I would say to you that the size of the parcel is not going to affect the perspective of the height of the street. And where you have specific setbacks provided from the street, how much of their land parcel lies in the back is not going to matter to the perspective of the person driving by. I would guess that somebody would use that as an argument to provide additional height. But again, if you had buildings that were set back from the street, sure, if somebody's got a large parcel and they put the building at the back of the lot, the perspective is going to be different than if you have the height at the front. So I guess what I would suggest to you is that you pick a height that the town is comfortable with. And I would also suggest being very specific about where height is measured to, and that should not be adaptable to the overlay district. It should be consistent through the town. So for example, it's my understanding that something like an elevator penthouse, which is part of a building, is not an exception to the building height. So I think when developers come in and they say, hey, my building's going to be 50 feet tall, but I'm going to have a penthouse that exceeds that height by 6 feet, you need to either provide an exception for the penthouse, or you need to communicate to them that that is considered to be part of the height. And that's all I have.
Charlotte, you had your hands.
I did, and I have three things. I want to climb right on what Noreen has just said. We've discussed this in several different contexts on the planning board, that where the height is really makes an enormous difference to the impact of a building on its surroundings, and to the extent possible, to reduce the height nearest to where there's going to be the most traffic, nearest the street, and move the height back away so that it doesn't become an overwhelming thing. It's moved back. So I think that's a very good thing. And adding in, Noreen, as you just did so practically, where it's measured makes a difference and what counts. So please, let's hang on to those thoughts. And then I'd like to add two more that actually came up last night in a discussion at the end of our meeting. I'm just going to ignore that. The one would be to have, these actually were an idea submitted to us by Jill Neubauer that I thought made an enormous amount of sense. If we could require a rendering of the context, buildings don't exist all alone. And that's part of the struggle we're having when Bob is talking about it puts his buildings into shade. Who would think of that immediately when you're looking at a rendering of a single building? You don't. If we could require a rendering of the context of the building, so to pick any two that are sort of current in the town now, the Saxon development where they thought, well, we can put up balloons and people will get a sense of it. No, they won't. It's the enormity of the entire facade, not an occasional height. What you needed were some way to picture how that huge proposal would loom over the residential neighborhood. So if we could require renderings that show you the context of the building from at least two perspectives. So there'd be that. And then the other that came actually from Jim last night is a revival of something that may have pre-existed in Falmouth, I'm not sure. And that's, you're right, we do not have a review for the aesthetics of the building, and yet it's that affects the town. And if we could put a foot in the water here and require a peer review by an architect so that we'd have a panel of people that we could call on. This now becomes an expense to the developer that they need to pay for this. And it would be getting a local architects. I think it would be better if it were local, maybe not. There would have to be conversation on that. But an architect's take a reaction to the aesthetics of the building. So those three things: the context rendering, the peer review, and the height and where it would exist, so that it's possible, if we take the Kimco example, the one I've thought about and tried to picture the most, if they could move the tall parts way to the back of that lot, there's enough space there so it doesn't really impact Worcester Court, and it would save it from the big impact on both the plaza and Davis Straits. And I think Michaela definitely had her hand up.
No, that excuse me, that's okay. You guys kind of covered some of the comments. Pat.
We used to have a shadowing bylaw, and this was in regard to residences. And I know we turned one down, at least one, in my time on the board, because what was proposed to be built shaded the house next door. So something like Bob is talking about, it wouldn't be, I don't know, because his is commercial. And we didn't have it with commercial. I think, Frank, you would remember that. And I don't know if it's still part of our bylaw or not. No, he doesn't remember it. Okay. But that's the kind of thing that Charlotte is talking about too, the step back of heights. If you've got a large lot, it's not as obnoxious. Part of what we're seeing too in objection is that if you can come right up to the sidewalk, it's gonna be right in your face, a very tall building. So I would hesitate to, I'd like to see more front setback, I think. So that it's more amenable to people sitting a bench there conversing. Those are my thoughts.
So Pat or Jed, so if under Mr. Cod right now, can you even ask for a peer review? And because it's not a 40B, does it require that that peer review is paid for by a developer, even though, because I don't think it does.
There's
You know,
nothing in there right now, Bob.
No, nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I like the,
In the entire bylaw book about a peer review, it would all be something new.
yeah, because I do like Charlotte. I like that idea of some kind of a review in advance. I know that when I was on zoning, we frequently asked for context of surrounding buildings on many projects. And it's something very easily done by the applicant. It is not a big expense. And it really does, it's very helpful to the boards when they see whatever the surrounding structures are. As far as the shadow, which, you know, I know they don't ask for it a lot now, that's also a very, I mean, it's about a 15-minute punch in a program and it tells you what it is. But again, but without some kind of a bylaw, like you said, a shadowing bylaw or something, I don't know, you know, I don't know if, again, if that gives you any teeth. And it kind of all stems back to just why I think for the planning board, a special permit process at some point is going to be better for you, because you could actually put all these into your own special permit process. These are what our criteria are. These are what we expect from the applicant. And then once we review, we'll see if there's situations where we need to do a waiver or a change.
There seemed to already be consensus among the group here that it would go special permit.
Mhm.
And so we would have to come up with the criteria for that.
I saw your hand up a few times.
I think something that we're living with is right now, for the stretch of town that we're talking about, that's sort of from 704 up to Stop and Shop Corner. That's basically a mixed 1-story, 2-story, smaller buildings, medium-sized buildings. It's quite a mix, but it has a low-lying feel to it because there are still enough 1-story buildings there. But I think certainly over the next 30 years, that's going to become at least 2-story and maybe 4-story, where there's going to be a change, so that there'll be a change in the density, there'll be a change in the height, there'll be a change in the look. And we ought to swallow that and realize that it's true and try to get a grip on it.
Bob Mitchell.
A couple of comments. One related to peer review. Towns have the authority, planning boards certainly have the authority to use the peer review process. But before you do that, you have to adopt the state statute, which is Chapter 44, Section 53G. You have to adopt that into your rules and regulations, and there's a bunch of requirements on how you use that process and how the review fees work and tracking the review fees. Hiring of an architect is certainly one of the professions, if you will, that you can use as part of the review fee process. So that's done by many towns around the state, by planning boards and zoning boards and conservation commissions, all of that. So that's the process you have to put in place first.
Could you suggest some towns that are doing it well and some suggested language?
I have no idea which ones are doing it well and which ones aren't. It's just, I have no idea on that one. You need to go to the Chapter 44, Section 353G, and it will tell you what language and what you have to put in.
Sorry,
We have
Bob, to
a-
interrupt.
we have
This
a
is
bylaw on
the
that.
53G that has been presented to the planning board in the past, as it's been presented to some of the other boards and committees in town as well. For a list of consultants, the planning board would have to approve it, and then you could utilize those consultants for different conservation more related project, building related project. But this is that 53G that has been presented.
And timely enough, it came up at last night's planning board meeting, and they're interested in talking about it in the future. So we will likely be bringing that topic back for discussion.
Bob seems to think at some point we had something more definite about a style book, but I don't think we ever did. There was conversation about form-based zoning, and it never went anywhere because we got sidetracked onto this Mr. Cod that is turning out to just need lots of tweaks because it doesn't have the flexibility or the sizes that are useful.
And, I think it's worth stating, building height, setbacks, those are sensitive topics. We totally understand that. I think it sounds like the group would be amenable to a discussion about it, and perhaps what we can do at the planning staff level is sort of give an assessment of what we know about the Mr. Cod district, and we can attempt to look at what a build out might look like in that district, so we can give a better understanding of what that might look like and how we might approach it.
We had not foreseen when we were talking about setbacks that the plaza, which is the biggest piece there, would decide to turn its back on Davis Straits, and that's what it's doing. That's okay. It means you still get frontage on the street. You still have to look at that, but it changes the feel of it.
Bob Mitchell, I'm sorry. I think I had cut you off. Did you have any more to say?
Well, just kind of related to the conversation that keeps touching on design review or architectural review or whatever. There's quite a few towns that have a design review district, or design review requirements, or design review recommendations or guidelines, or even a design review board. So it's not universal across the state or across the country, but it is not uncommon for communities to have that kind of a process.
Well, we've been trying to streamline what we've got, not add another board, so that if a peer review process could be added in without adding in a whole nother board, that's just would be potentially a great delay.
Okay, any other comments on dimensional? Seeing none. Okay, so the definition of mixed use development came up, and it was one of the topics we wanted to cover today because of a recent application that is currently before the Zoning Board of Appeals. And that application is mixing the long-term residential uses with what we all know locally to be our commercial accommodations use, which is traditionally hotel, motel, B&B, those types of establishments. If anyone's followed the case as it's made its way through the Zoning Board of Appeals, there's complexity. I won't get into what that complexity looks like here because we don't have enough time. But one item we did want to discuss with the group is this potential change to the definition that may or may not, well, let's start with the may restrict commercial accommodations or not allow commercial accommodations as a commercial use that could be mixed with long-term residential in the Mr. Cod district. And again, I only pose it as a potential discussion item if folks want to kick that around. So your thoughts?
That sounds as if it would further restrict what's been proposed. And I thought we were not looking for something more restrictive.
I don't think I understand what you mean by what is proposed.
Well, we know the project that you're talking about, and that's saying that one portion of a building would be under one, considered under one zoning bylaw, and the rest of it under another, even though the Mr. Cod allows mixed residential and commercial. So you'd think that that would be under a single thing. And what we were looking for is some way to enable that without having to go to two boards.
Jen,
Right, so-
sorry to interrupt, just a comment here. There's currently an open case before the zoning board. So while I understand that this is a topic that needs to be covered, I think I would recommend, and Morik maybe wants to speak to that we not discuss that topic at this moment where there's an open case.
So I'm
Yeah.
glad you brought that up. We could talk about it if we could make sure not to implicate the existing project, but I'm afraid that that's really difficult to do. And I don't really have a lot of confidence that we'll be able to thread that needle. So I'd prefer that we not. And I'm glad you brought it up, Maureen. Thank you.
Thank you, Noreen and Laura. Appreciate it. So, the last item that I wanted to get to is the idea of density. Right now, our density in the Mr. Cod district says 20 units per 40,000 square feet. There's been some interpretation that indicates that you would need a property owner or an applicant would need 40,000 square feet in order to start the conversation within the Mr. Cod district. i.e., you cannot have fractional density. So if someone were to come in with a 35,000 square foot lot, they would not be eligible in a Mr. Cod district because they don't have the minimum square footage. I want to sort of have that conversation with the group, because if we intend to allow all of the parcels within the Mr. Cod, or I should say lots within the Mr. Cod district, to potentially have an application, many of them would not be eligible under that interpretation. And if that interpretation is what we determine within the group, then perhaps we need to think about some additional language that would make it more clear that we actually intend to do this fractional density. Now, my understanding is that past practice within the town has always been fractional, but we want to, again, in the spirit of clarity, make sure that we discuss it, and then if we need to add language, we do so. So I saw Bob and I saw Noreen.
Okay, so sorry to be rude again, but I'm going to jump in. Again, we do have an open case, so I would recommend thought about discussing this. But the topic having been raised, what I would say to you is there are other provisions within the bylaw that allow a certain density, again, based on an acre typically. And what I would say is that it would be of value uniformly across the bylaw to allow, the language or part thereof. I guess the only thing I would consider having the board, the group here thinking about is, again, we do have currently an open application in the Mr. Cod overlay district.
Laura,
Maybe
I yield to you on this.
no, it's okay. I think maybe before the next meeting, we can find a way to figure out how to address this with limitations. Because I understand that this is a topic that needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed as soon as possible to iron out any of the perceived infirmities, and maybe we can figure out a way to have this be a topic of conversation without impinging upon the jurisdiction of the ZBA at the moment. But I think maybe we need to set up some ground rules, and I'm not prepared to actually do that while we're in the middle of it.
That's fair. We have to be careful. I understand.
Okay, thank you.
So that really completes the topics of the review that we wanted to cover. Michaela, can you check and see if anyone is in the audience? I had got an indication that perhaps our chat feature was not working properly. So is anyone still in the audience?
We do still have one attendee, but we don't appear to have anyone that I can see in the chat function that's reached out with any comments. Noreen, you had previously discussed the shadow study, but the group had already discussed that comment. That's the only one.
So Charlotte,
I wonder before we sign off, if I could just ask a question. Is there any definition anywhere of economical? It seems to be, if a developer says, oh, it's not economical, they get a pass. What exactly does that mean? Is there any, I know that one of the differences between Mr. Cod and 40B is 40B forces you into a situation of limiting your profit. So that's an economic measure, and Mr. Cod does not. But what is the definition of economical? How much money do you have to make?
I don't think that's really a local decision. That's a state decision, isn't it, under 40B?
Under 40B, it certainly is.
Yeah.
But is there anywhere that would give guidance to that?
That'd be awfully difficult to do.
Well, there are, in retail business, others would know this a lot better than I would. There's sort of a kind of a standard of how much is an okay profit and how much is gouging.
I'm not even sure that's allowed under zoning to get into the,
Well, I don't know, and yet it seems to give you a pass-go free pass on everything.
but at the state level.
I think it depends, Charlotte, if like in the 40B where it is a state level, there is a guideline, like you said, that says what your profit margin, maximum profit margin can be. So if a person brought up the fact, if I was doing a project and I said suddenly that would make it uneconomical, I could then be asked to show how. If I could show that that infringed on whatever my allowance would be, then I could prove it. In a general application, because there is no, limitation on some of these, it's really an open matter. There's no way to, I mean, a developer could say to you that on a project I'm building, this doesn't work for me because what I figure I should make or what I want to do, this doesn't fit within my plans. They're allowed to do that. I don't think you can put a limitation on their profitability, and I don't even know if you could put that into a bylaw. I mean, we only got to deal with it with the 40Bs because of the state has one. It says what their limitation is, and even that can be, is problematic because when you come to it as a town, the town can't question the figures even. So, if I had an issue with the project and I question that I don't believe these figures are correct, I think they might be inflated or understated. I can make the statement, but I can't do anything about it. They basically accept whatever is turned in.
Well, I wasn't thinking so much of trying to impose limitations because money changes so much. I mean, you really couldn't do it. What seems to hold down excess profit is public opinion. So that as you went through a development process, if the information were part of it and it were known, I think it would be the reaction that would be some sort of a control on it.
Well, if I may
Just the
just,
information itself.
if you go before the Housing Appeals Committee and the developer raises the issue that the conditions imposed by the Zoning Board of Appeals on a 40B make it uneconomic, the developer presents an economist to come in and testify before the Housing Appeals Committee. Then the town has to produce an economist who says something different. And you sit there and you just scratch your head because you don't really know who's telling the truth.
Wouldn't common sense at some point suggest an answer?
Not really. Very difficult. And that's why the Housing Appeals Committee has a difficult time even dealing with the issue.
Pat, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, in answer to Charlotte, in a way, these are just my thoughts here. On something like we're talking about Mr. Cod, what's economic, what's not. I think it depends upon how much the town wants what the developer is proposing and how much the developer wants what he is proposing. Because if we do this under special permit, if we don't want it, we can turn it down. If the developer doesn't like that, this becomes a negotiation between the town and the developer as to what can and will be done. Remember, the upper hand is the planning boards if we turn this over to a special permit.
Anyone else? I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Any other
Yeah, no.
closing thoughts?
Is it just really quick, Jed, because I don't know if these are changes coming up, but under Mr. Cod, under the purpose intent section. So I assume they're going to change the DHCD comments to the livable communities. My other question was, the first item under the purpose intent says to enable the town to reach a goal of 10% housing under the SHI. If no projects have been built under Mr. Cod and we happen to reach that 10%, does that, what does that sentence do at that point? It's just like something to think of, because
Yep.
There's a chance you may get to that.
Okay, so I'm glad that we had this discussion today. I think we'll review the tape just to make sure we've got all of the thoughts firm, but I believe, we understand the perspective of the working group. Let's talk about the next meeting, which we, beforehand we'll work with Maura to figure out how we can discuss the items that we want to discuss in a way that makes sense. What we typically have been doing is meeting on the last Wednesday of the month. That would be April 24th. And if 11 o'clock works for everybody, we can go ahead and pencil that in.
It's okay for me.
Yeah.
It's okay for
too.
me.
Great. April 24th at 11 a.m. We'll make sure to send out the agenda and all the materials in advance.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Sure.